Get your hands off me! Rebecca's voice echoed through Terminal B as her husband's palm connected with her shoulder, sending her stumbling backward into a row of plastic chairs. The impact sent shockwaves through her 7-month pregnant belly as she clutched the armrest. Gasping, around them, Denver International Airport buzzed with typical Friday evening chaos. But now dozens of travelers had stopped to stare. Phone cameras emerged from pockets like weapons, recording the billionaire husband who had just shoved his pregnant wife in full view of the public. Marcus Blackwood straightened his $2,000 suit jacket and glanced around with the casual indifference of a man who owned enough politicians to make problems disappear. His pale blue eyes, the ones that had once charmed Rebecca into believing she was the luckiest woman alive, now held nothing but cold calculation. "You're making a scene," he said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar edge that had trained Rebecca to flinch over the past 3 years of marriage. "Get up!" Rebecca remained seated, one hand protectively covering her belly, where their daughter kicked frantically, as if sensing the tension. The baby had been active all day, and now Rebecca wondered if somehow, even in the womb, her child could feel the danger that surrounded them both. "I said, get up! Rebecca!" Marcus stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the scotch he'd been drinking in the airline lounge. "Our flight board's in 10 minutes. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." A deep voice cut through the tension as Timothy Walsh, airport security supervisor, approached with 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Walsh was a 20-year veteran who had seen everything from terrorist threats to celebrity meltdowns. But the sight of a pregnant woman being assaulted always got his attention. Marcus turned with the practiced smile he reserved for people he considered beneath his notice. "Officer, there's no problem here. My wife simply lost her footing. She's been having balance issues with the pregnancy." Rebecca looked up at the security supervisor, seeing genuine concern in his weathered face. This was her moment. She could press charges right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. But Marcus controlled everything: her credit cards, her bank accounts, the prenatal care for their baby. He had made sure she understood exactly how helpless she was without him. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Walsh asked, ignoring Marcus entirely. "Do you need medical attention?" Before Rebecca could answer, a crackling announcement filled the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 847 to Seattle has been delayed due to crew scheduling issues. Boarding will now begin at approximately 8:30 p.m. We apologize for the inconvenience." Marcus cursed under his breath. They were stuck here for at least another hour, trapped together in this public space where his carefully maintained image had already taken a hit. Rebecca saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing the cost of his reputation against the satisfaction of putting her in her place. "Everything's fine," Rebecca heard herself saying, the words automatic after years of practice. "I just need to be more careful." But even as she spoke, her eyes found the gate area where their flight crew was emerging from the jetway. The captain had removed his hat, running a hand through silver-streaked dark hair as he surveyed the commotion at his gate. Something about his profile made Rebecca's breath catch. It couldn't be. The pilot turned slightly, and Rebecca saw features she had memorized as a child but hadn't seen in 18 years. The same strong jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders when he was thinking. Captain Daniel Hayes, according to the nameplate visible on his uniform, looked every inch the authority figure he had always been. Her father. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Walsh was saying to Marcus, who was already pulling out his phone to call his lawyers. Rebecca stood slowly, her legs unsteady as she processed the impossible coincidence. Of all the flights, all the airlines, all the pilots in the world, she was about to fly on a plane captained by the man who had walked out of her life when she was 12 years old. Daniel Hayes hadn't noticed her yet, focused as he was on speaking quietly with a flight attendant about the delay. But Rebecca knew it was only a matter of time before their eyes met, and when they did, everything would change. Marcus was arguing with security now, his voice rising as he demanded to speak to their supervisor's supervisor. Other passengers had begun filming the scene, and Rebecca realized that by tomorrow morning, videos of Marcus Blackwood assaulting his pregnant wife would be trending on social media. "Mr. Blackwood," Walsh said, consulting his tablet, "I'm going to need you to calm down, or we'll have to ask you to depart the secure area." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus snapped. I could buy this entire airport and everyone in it. Sir, your wealth doesn't give you the right to assault anyone, including your wife. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the familiar wash of humiliation that came with being the center of Marcus's public displays of control. But this time was different. This time, her father was 50 feet away, wearing a captain's uniform and carrying himself with the quiet confidence she remembered from childhood. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was looking directly at her. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by something that might have been pain. He started walking toward their group, his expression unreadable but his steps purposeful. "Excuse me," Daniel said as he approached, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "I'm Captain Hayes. Is there a problem with my passengers?" Marcus turned, clearly ready to unleash his frustration on another member of the airline staff. "Your airline has already delayed our flight, and now security is harassing paying customers over a simple misunderstanding." Daniel's eyes never left Rebecca's face. There was recognition there, certainly, but also something else. Concern. The kind of protective instinct she remembered from scraped knees and playground bullies, before everything went wrong between her parents. "Ma'am," Daniel said quietly, "are you all right?" It was the same tone he had used when she was 8 years old and had fallen off her bike, the same gentle authority that had once made her feel like the safest little girl in the world. Rebecca felt tears threatening and forced them back. "I'm fine," she managed. "She's my wife," Marcus said sharply. "And unless you plan to fly this plane sometime tonight, I suggest you mind your own business." Daniel finally looked at Marcus, and Rebecca saw something in her father's expression that made her shiver. It was the look of a man taking measure of an opponent, the same calculating assessment she had seen him use on difficult business partners when she was young. "Mr. Blackwood," Daniel said, reading Marcus's name from the passenger manifest Walsh handed him. "I understand you're frustrated about the delay. However, the safety and comfort of all passengers is my responsibility. That includes ensuring no one feels threatened or unsafe." "Threatened?" Marcus laughed. "By whom?" "Sir," Walsh interrupted, "we have multiple witnesses and security footage of you physically assaulting this woman. We can handle this quietly, or we can involve federal authorities. Your choice." Rebecca watched the standoff between the three men and felt like she was watching her past collide with her present in the most surreal way possible. Her father, whose absence had shaped so much of her adult need for security, now stood between her and the husband whose presence had become her greatest threat. The irony was almost too much to bear. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney. This is harassment, and I'll have all your jobs." "You're welcome to make that call," Daniel said calmly. "In the meantime, boarding for Flight 847 will commence once we've resolved this situation to everyone's satisfaction." Rebecca looked between her husband and her father, two men who didn't know they were connected by her, both powerful in their own ways, both used to getting what they wanted, but only one of them was looking at her like she mattered more than his own convenience. For the first time in 3 years, Rebecca Sterling Blackwood began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had other options than the gilded cage Marcus had built around her. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Rebecca took it as a sign. It was time to stop running from her past and start fighting for her future. Captain Daniel Hayes studied the pregnant woman's face, memories flooding back like a dam breaking. The last time he had seen Rebecca, she was 12 years old, crying in the driveway as he loaded his suitcase into a taxi. She had begged him not to leave, promised she would be good if he stayed, as if a 12-year-old could somehow fix a marriage that had been dying for years. Now she stood before him, 28 years old and 7 months pregnant, married to a man who had just physically assaulted her in public. The protective instinct that had driven Daniel to work 18-hour days building Hayes Aviation, all to provide for the family he thought he'd lost forever, roared to life. "Becky," he said quietly, using the childhood nickname only he had ever called her. Marcus stopped mid-conversation with his attorney to stare at them. "How do you know my wife's name?" Rebecca's eyes widened. She had forgotten that Marcus didn't know about her family history, that she had never told him about the father who had chosen his airline career over staying with them. In Marcus's world, people were either useful or disposable, and Rebecca had learned early in their relationship that painful family history fell into the disposable category. We've met before, Daniel said carefully, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. A long time ago. I don't think so, Marcus replied sharply. Rebecca doesn't associate with airline employees. The casual dismissal in Marcus's voice made Daniel's jaw tighten. 25 years of military service followed by building a $2 billion aviation empire had taught him to recognize disrespect, but more importantly, it had taught him how to respond to it strategically. Mr. Blackwood, Daniel said, his voice taking on the tone he reserved for particularly difficult air traffic controllers. I think there may be some confusion about who you're speaking to. Timothy Walsh checked his tablet again, frowning. Captain Hayes, according to our records, you're not just crew on this flight. That's correct, Daniel replied, still watching Rebecca's face for any sign of distress. I own this airline. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus's expression shifted from arrogance to uncertainty as he processed this information. Rebecca felt the world tilt slightly, the way it had when she was 8 and learned that other kids' fathers didn't pilot their own planes to family vacations. I'm sorry. What? Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Hayes Aviation. Daniel Hayes, founder and CEO. His face paled as he read. Net worth estimated at $2.1 billion. Rebecca watched her husband's mental calculations, seeing the exact moment he realized he had just tried to bully someone with more money and power than he possessed. In Marcus's world, that was the only currency that mattered. Daddy, Rebecca whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. The airport noise seemed to fade around them. Daniel took a step closer, and Rebecca saw that his eyes were the same warm brown she remembered, though now they were lined with years and regret. Hello, sweetheart, he said softly. You look beautiful. Marcus's head snapped back and forth between them. Daddy, what the hell is going on here? Rebecca is my daughter, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the gate area with quiet authority. And from what I just witnessed, she's in need of protection from her husband. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rebecca saw him processing the implications, that he had just assaulted the daughter of a billionaire airline owner in front of security cameras, that his victim had powerful family he knew nothing about, that every assumption he had made about his wife's helplessness had just been proven wrong. This is impossible, Marcus sputtered. Rebecca's father abandoned her family when she was a child. He's nobody. I made mistakes, Daniel said, his eyes locked on Rebecca's. I thought I was providing for my family by building something lasting. I didn't understand that being absent while building security was the same as abandoning the people I was trying to protect. Rebecca felt tears threatening again. This was the conversation she had imagined having with him 1,000 times over the years, but never in an airport, never while pregnant and married to an abuser, never with security cameras recording every word. Mr. Blackwood, Timothy Walsh said, consulting his notes, I think we need to have a conversation about the assault we witnessed. Captain Hayes, would you like to press charges on behalf of your daughter? Daniel looked at Rebecca, and she saw a question in his eyes. The choice was hers. For the first time in 3 years, someone was asking what she wanted instead of telling her what she needed. Rebecca started, then stopped. Marcus was watching her with the expression she had learned to fear, the one that promised consequences later, when there were no witnesses or cameras. Rebecca, Daniel said gently, you don't have to decide anything right now, but you should know that whatever you choose, you're not alone anymore. Marcus stepped forward, his mask of civility slipping entirely. She's my wife. This is a private family matter, and I don't care how much money you have or what airline you own. She belongs to me. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rebecca had heard variations of this speech dozens of times, but hearing it in front of her father made her see it differently. She saw the possessiveness, the assumption of ownership, the casual dismissal of her autonomy. Nobody belongs to anyone, Daniel said quietly, but his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect in boardrooms and cockpits around the world. And certainly not my daughter. Flight attendant Jennifer Cruz approached their group, her expression professional but concerned. Captain Hayes, we're ready to begin boarding whenever you give the word. Should I make an announcement about the continued delay? Daniel looked at Rebecca again. That depends on whether my daughter feels safe traveling with her husband. It was the question Rebecca had been avoiding for months. Marcus's behavior had been escalating, his control tightening, his threats becoming more direct. But she had nowhere to go. No money of her own, no family to turn to, or so she had thought. I need to think, Rebecca said finally. Take all the time you need, Daniel replied. This flight doesn't leave until you're ready. Marcus's face flushed red. You can't delay a commercial flight for personal reasons. There are other passengers, schedules, connections. Mr. O'Blackwood, Daniel interrupted. This is my airline, my aircraft, and my crew. The flight leaves when I say it leaves. The power dynamics that had governed Rebecca's marriage for 3 years shifted in that moment. Marcus, who had always been the richest, most powerful person in any room, suddenly found himself outranked, and everyone present could see how poorly he was handling it. Rebecca, Marcus said, his voice dropping to the tone he used for private threats. We need to talk. Privately. No, Daniel said before Rebecca could respond. Any conversation you have with my daughter happens in public, with witnesses present. She's my wife, Marcus repeated, but the words sounded hollow now. She's my daughter, Daniel replied. And she was my daughter for 12 years before she was your wife for 3. I know what she looks like when she's scared, and I know what she looks like when she's being threatened. Right now, she looks like both. Rebecca stared at her father, amazed that he could still read her so well after all these years apart. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone truly see her, to have someone care more about her well-being than their own convenience. Captain Hayes, Walsh said quietly, what would you like us to do about the assault? Daniel looked at Rebecca one more time. That's my daughter's decision, but I want it noted that Hayes Aviation takes a zero-tolerance policy toward domestic violence, and that extends to our passengers as well as our employees. Marcus realized he was losing control of the situation. This is ridiculous, Rebecca. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them you're fine. Rebecca looked at her husband, then at her father, then at the security supervisor who was still waiting for her answer. Around them, other passengers were watching the drama unfold. Phones recording, social media posts already being crafted. For 3 years, she had been telling people she was fine. For 3 years, she had been protecting Marcus's reputation at the expense of her own safety. But standing there, with her father's support in a room full of witnesses, she realized she had a choice. No, she said quietly. I don't think I will. The word hung in the air like a declaration of independence. Marcus's face went white, then red. Rebecca, you don't know what you're doing. Maybe not, she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. But I know what you did. Daniel smiled for the first time since recognizing her, and Rebecca remembered why she had always felt so safe when he was around. The little girl who had begged him not to leave was gone, but the woman she had become was finally ready to stop running from the past and start fighting for her future. Daniel stepped closer to Rebecca, noting the way she unconsciously shifted away from Marcus. 25 years of reading people in high-stakes negotiations had taught him to recognize fear, and his daughter was terrified of her own husband. Mr. Walsh, Daniel said, turning to the security supervisor, I'd like to request that you document this incident thoroughly. I suspect this won't be the last time Mr. Blackwood's behavior becomes an issue. Marcus pulled out his phone again, speed dialing his legal team. Richard, it's Marcus. I need you at Denver International immediately, Gate B12, and bring the full team. Sir, Walsh said calmly, calling attorneys won't change what happened here tonight. Watch me, Marcus snapped, then turned to Rebecca. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Without me, you have nothing, no house, no money, no insurance for that baby. You think your deadbeat father is going to take care of you. Daniel felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had driven him to excel at everything he touched. Mr. Blackwood, you seem to be operating under several misconceptions. Allow me to clarify something. He pulled out his own phone and made a quick call. Jennifer, it's Daniel. I need you to pull up the passenger manifest for Flight 847 and make some adjustments. Move Rebecca Sterling from seat 23B to 2A. Yes, first class. And Mr. Blackwood can remain in his original seat. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You can't separate us. She's my wife. Actually, I can, Daniel replied, ending his call. This is my aircraft, operated by my crew, under my authority as both pilot and owner. And I don't allow passengers to threaten or intimidate other passengers, regardless of their relationship. Rebecca watched the exchange with growing amazement. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone protect her without expecting something in return. Marcus had always framed his control as protection, but it had never felt like this, like safety instead of imprisonment. Flight attendant Jennifer Cruz returned with a new boarding pass. Mrs. Sterling, you're all set in first class. Mr. Blackwood, you'll remain in economy as originally assigned. This is discrimination, Marcus said, his voice rising again. You can't treat paying customers differently based on personal relationships. Mr. Blackwood, Daniel said patiently, you physically assaulted another passenger in full view of witnesses and security cameras. The fact that you won't be arrested and banned from flying is more consideration than you deserve. Walsh nodded. Captain Hayes is being generous. We could press federal charges for assault in an airport, which carries serious penalties. Rebecca looked at her boarding pass, surprised to see her maiden name printed there instead of Blackwood. She hadn't used Sterling in 3 years, but somehow seeing it in print felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had thought was lost forever. How did you know to use Sterling? She asked Daniel quietly. I've kept track of you, he admitted. I know you got your MBA from Northwestern, that you worked for Davidson Marketing before you married, that you won the Emerging Professional Award in 2021. I know you love classical music and that you volunteer at the Children's Hospital when Marcus allows it. The admission hit Rebecca like a physical blow. You've been watching me. I've been hoping, Daniel corrected gently. Hoping for a chance to make things right. Hoping you were happy. Hoping you would forgive me someday. I hired a private investigator, not to intrude in your life, but to make sure you were safe and successful. Marcus overheard this exchange and his expression darkened further. You had her followed. That's stalking. I had her protected, Daniel replied firmly. There's a difference, and given what I just witnessed, it appears my concerns were justified. Rebecca's mind raced as she processed this information. Her father had been watching over her from a distance all these years, even when she thought he had completely forgotten about her existence. It changed everything she thought she knew about her own history. The restraining order you had dismissed last year, Daniel continued quietly, when your neighbor filed it after witnessing Marcus push you down your front steps, my legal team ensured it was handled properly. Even though you chose not to pursue it, Rebecca stared at him. She had never understood why that case had disappeared so quietly, why the neighbor's attorney had suddenly become so competent and well-funded. That was you. I couldn't let you get hurt while I stood by and did nothing, Daniel said. Not again. Marcus was frantically texting his attorneys, his face growing redder by the minute. This is all going to backfire on both of you. Rebecca signed a prenup. She has no access to my accounts, no right to community property, no claim to anything. If she leaves me, she leaves with nothing. Mr. Blackwood, Daniel said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow student, I built a $2 billion company from nothing. I think I can manage to provide for my pregnant daughter. The words sent a chill through Marcus that Rebecca could see in his expression. For the first time in their marriage, she was watching her husband realize he might not have the upper hand. Attention passengers, came an announcement over the gate speakers. Flight 847 to Seattle will begin boarding momentarily. First-class passengers and passengers requiring additional time may board now. Daniel looked at Rebecca. You don't have to make any decisions tonight except whether you feel safe traveling. Everything else can wait. Rebecca looked at her boarding pass again, then at Marcus, who was still frantically working his phone, and finally at her father. The man she had spent 18 years resenting for abandoning his family had just demonstrated more concern for her well-being in 30 minutes than her husband had shown in 3 years. I want to know everything, she said quietly. About why you really left. About what you've been doing all these years. About why Mom never told me you were keeping track of us. Daniel nodded. You deserve answers. All of them. But first, let's get you somewhere safe. Marcus finally looked up from his phone. My attorney is on his way. This conversation isn't over. Mr. Blackwood, Walsh said, checking his watch. Your attorney is welcome to meet you at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. For now, you need to decide if you're boarding this flight or finding alternative transportation. Rebecca made her decision. I'm boarding, she said firmly. In first class, as she walked toward the jetway, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sensation of choosing her own path instead of being led down someone else's. Behind her, she heard Marcus arguing with security and demanding to speak to Daniel's supervisors. But for the first time in 3 years, Rebecca didn't look back. She was too busy moving forward. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737 felt like sanctuary. Rebecca settled into seat 2A, accepting a glass of sparkling water from Jennifer Cruz while trying to process the surreal turn her evening had taken. Through the small window, she could see Denver's lights spreading out below them as they climbed toward cruising altitude. Mrs. Sterling, Jennifer said quietly, Captain Hayes asked me to let you know he'll check on you once we reach cruising altitude. In the meantime, is there anything you need? Rebecca shook her head, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter had finally settled into a calmer rhythm. The baby seemed to sense that they were moving away from danger, or maybe Rebecca's own reduced stress was having an effect. Behind the first-class curtain, she could hear Marcus's voice raised in argument with another passenger about seat assignments, even separated by several rows and a fabric barrier. His presence felt oppressive. 3 years of marriage had trained her to monitor his moods, to anticipate his displeasure, to manage his emotions before they became her problem. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had witnessed her husband's fury directed at someone who refused to be intimidated by it. Daniel Hayes had faced down Marcus's threats with the calm authority of someone who had weathered far worse storms. And Rebecca was beginning to remember what strength looked like when it was used to protect rather than control. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. This tantrum ends now. You will apologize to me and my attorney when we land, and we will never speak of this again. Rebecca stared at the message, recognizing the familiar pattern. Marcus would frame her resistance as childish behavior, her fear as overreaction, her need for safety as disloyalty. For 3 years, this approach had worked because Rebecca had no alternatives and no allies. But tonight, she had remembered that she was Daniel Hayes' daughter, and Daniel Hayes had never backed down from a fight when someone he loved was threatened. She deleted the message without responding. 20 minutes into the flight, Daniel's voice came over the intercom with the calm professionalism she remembered from childhood. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, and we're expecting smooth air for most of our flight to Seattle. Flight attendants, you're free to move about the cabin. 5 minutes later, Daniel appeared at Rebecca's seat, having turned control over to his co-pilot. He looked older up close, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years of responsibility and regret, but his presence still carried the same reassuring authority she remembered. How are you feeling? He asked, taking the empty seat beside her. Confused, Rebecca admitted. Scared, angry. I'm not sure which emotion is winning. Daniel nodded. That's understandable. You've had a lot of information to process tonight. See, Dad, Rebecca said, testing the word on her tongue after so many years. Why did you really leave? And please don't tell me it was about building the airline. I need the truth. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking out the small window at the darkness beyond. Your mother gave me an ultimatum, he said finally. She said I could choose between my family and my dream of starting an airline. She was tired of me being gone all the time, tired of the financial uncertainty, tired of waiting for someday to become today. So you chose the airline? I chose what I thought was the best way to provide for my family long term, Daniel corrected. I thought if I could build something substantial, something lasting, I could give you and your mother security that a pilot's salary never could. I thought I was being responsible. Rebecca felt tears threatening. But you never came back. Your mother remarried 6 months after our divorce was final, Daniel said quietly. She made it clear that my presence in your life would only confuse things, that it would be better for everyone if I stayed away. I thought maybe she was right. Maybe you would be better off with a father who was actually there, instead of one who was always traveling. You thought wrong, Rebecca said, her voice breaking slightly. Yes, Daniel agreed. I thought wrong about a lot of things, but I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped trying to make sure you were safe and taken care of from a distance. Rebecca wiped her eyes with the tissue Jennifer had quietly placed on her tray table. Tell me about the investigator, about the restraining order, about all of it. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but he didn't evade the question. I hired someone to send me reports on your well-being, not invasive surveillance, just public information, school achievements, career milestones, major life events. When you graduated college, when you got engaged, when you announced your pregnancy, you knew I was pregnant. I've known since you were 12 weeks along, Daniel admitted. I also knew Marcus's reputation in business circles, and I was concerned about what kind of man my daughter had married. Rebecca remembered Marcus's courtship, the way he had swept her off her feet with expensive gifts and exclusive restaurants, the way he had made her feel chosen and special. She had mistaken possessiveness for passion, control for care. What kind of reputation does he have? Daniel's expression hardened. The kind that involves leveraging people's vulnerabilities, pressuring competitors into unfavorable deals, and using legal threats to silence anyone who challenges him. The kind that makes other businessmen careful about bringing their wives to industry events. The words hit Rebecca like ice water. She had been isolated from Marcus's business life, told it would be boring for her, but now she wondered what else she had been protected from seeing. There's more, Daniel continued. The private investigator documented several incidents of concerning behavior. The neighbor who filed the restraining order wasn't the first person to witness Marcus being physical with you. Rebecca closed her eyes, remembering incidents she had minimized or rationalized away. The time he had grabbed her wrist so hard it bruised when she disagreed with him at a dinner party. The way he monitored her phone calls and social interactions. The gradual isolation from friends who asked too many questions about her happiness. Why didn't you intervene sooner? She asked. Because I was afraid, Daniel admitted. Afraid that if I inserted myself into your life, Marcus would take it out on you. Afraid that my presence would make things worse instead of better. Afraid that you wouldn't want my help after all these years. The honesty in his voice broke something open in Rebecca's chest. She had spent so many years imagining her father as the man who had abandoned his family for money and success. But the reality was more complicated. He was a man who had made terrible choices while trying to do the right thing, who had spent 18 years trying to protect a daughter who didn't even know he was watching. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly, for all of it, for leaving, for staying away, for not being brave enough to fight for you when you needed me most. Rebecca looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw not the abandoning parent of her childhood memories, but a man who had spent nearly 2 decades carrying the weight of his mistakes. What happens now, she asked. That depends on what you want, Daniel replied. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, you have options. You have family, you have resources, and you have people who will fight for you. From somewhere behind the first-class curtain came the sound of Marcus's voice, still raised in complaint about something. Rebecca felt her shoulders tense automatically, her body responding to the familiar sound of his displeasure. Daniel noticed her reaction. He can't hurt you up here, he said firmly. Not on my aircraft, not with my crew, not while I'm responsible for your safety. Rebecca realized that for the first time in 3 years, she actually felt safe, not just physically protected, but genuinely safe in the way that came from being seen and valued and defended by someone who asked nothing in return. The baby kicked, a strong movement that made Rebecca gasp and smile simultaneously. She's active tonight, Rebecca said, placing both hands on her belly. A daughter, Rebecca confirmed. Due in 8 weeks. Daniel's expression softened completely. A granddaughter. For the word hung between them, loaded with possibility and hope. Rebecca realized that her daughter would grow up knowing her grandfather, would have the relationship with Daniel that Rebecca had lost. I want her to be safe, Rebecca said quietly. I want her to grow up seeing what healthy relationships look like, what respect looks like, what real love looks like, instead of control disguised as care. Then we'll make sure that's what she sees, Daniel replied. For the first time in years, Rebecca began to believe that her future might be something she could choose rather than something that was chosen for her. The plane flew on through the darkness, carrying them away from one life and toward the possibility of another. Rebecca was dozing fitfully when the first sharp pain cut through her abdomen like a knife. She jerked awake, gasping, her hands instinctively flying to her belly as the sensation peaked and then slowly subsided. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Jennifer Cruz was beside her immediately, having witnessed Rebecca's distress from the galley area. I don't know," Rebecca panted, checking her watch. The pain had lasted almost a full minute, much longer than the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been experiencing for weeks. That felt different. Jennifer pressed the call button that connected directly to the cockpit. "Captain Hayes, we need you in first class. Medical emergency." Within seconds, Daniel was back at Rebecca's seat, his pilot's calm masking what she could see was deep concern. "What's happening?" "Contraction, I think," Rebecca said, another wave of pain beginning to build. "But I'm only 32 weeks. It's too early." Daniel's expression shifted into crisis management mode. "Jennifer, get Dr. Martinez from 14C up here immediately and prepare the medical kit." Rebecca gripped the armrests as the second contraction peaked. This one's stronger and longer than the first. Through the haze of pain, she heard Daniel speaking rapidly into his headset, medical terminology and airport codes she couldn't follow. Dr. Elena Martinez, a pediatrician who had introduced herself during boarding, appeared with the flight's medical kit. After a quick examination and series of questions, her expression was grave. "Mrs. Sterling, your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and these contractions are consistent with preterm labor," she said quietly. "We need to get you to a hospital immediately." Daniel was already back on his headset. "Denver Center, this is Hayes 847 requesting immediate priority handling for medical emergency. We need vectors to the nearest suitable airport for emergency landing." Hayes 847 Denver Center, are you declaring a medical emergency? Affirmative, medical emergency. Passenger in preterm labor at 32 weeks with hypertensive complications. Requesting Denver International for immediate return. From behind the first-class curtain came Marcus's voice, louder now and clearly agitated. "What the hell is going on? Why are we turning around?" Rebecca felt another contraction building and tried to breathe through it, the way her childbirth instructor had taught her. But the combination of pain and stress was overwhelming. She was dimly aware of Daniel coordinating with air traffic control, of Dr. Martinez monitoring her vital signs, of Jennifer clearing the area around her seat. "Rebecca," Marcus's voice was closer now, and she looked up to see him pushing past the flight attendant who was trying to maintain the first-class boundary. "What's wrong? What's happening to my baby?" "Sir, I need you to return to your seat," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "Mrs. Sterling needs calm and quiet right now." "She's my wife," Marcus snapped. "I have a right to be here." "Mr. Blackwood," Daniel said without looking up from his emergency procedures, "return to your seat immediately, or I'll have you restrained for the remainder of this flight." Rebecca watched the familiar confrontation through a haze of pain and medication that Dr. Martinez had administered to try to slow her labor. Even in crisis, Marcus's first instinct was to assert his ownership and control, rather than simply asking what he could do to help. "This is your fault," Marcus said, pointing at Daniel. "She was fine until you started filling her head with ideas about leaving me. The stress of this ridiculous family drama is what's causing this." "Sir," Dr. Martinez interrupted, "elevated stress levels can indeed contribute to preterm labor, which is why I need everyone who isn't helping to stay away from the patient." Rebecca felt tears mixing with sweat as another contraction hit. Through the aircraft's sound system, she could hear Daniel communicating with emergency services on the ground, arranging for paramedics to meet them at the gate, coordinating with the neonatal intensive care unit at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. "Becky," Daniel said during a brief pause in radio communications, "I've contacted Dr. Amanda Foster at Presbyterian. She's your friend from college, isn't she? She's waiting for us." Rebecca looked at him in amazement. Even in crisis, her father had remembered details about her life, had known exactly who to call. Amanda Foster had been Rebecca's roommate and closest friend before Marcus had gradually driven a wedge between them, claiming that Amanda was jealous of Rebecca's success and happiness. "How did you—" Rebecca started, then gasped as another contraction began. I told you I've been keeping track, Daniel said gently. Dr. Foster has been hoping to hear from you for a long time. Shakwa, Marcus overheard this exchange and his face darkened. Amanda Foster, you called that woman without consulting me. She's not even Rebecca's doctor. She's the head of high-risk obstetrics at one of the best hospitals in the country, Daniel replied calmly. And she cares about my daughter. Your daughter is my wife, and medical decisions go through me, Marcus said. Dr. Martinez looked up from checking Rebecca's blood pressure again. Actually, sir, medical decisions go through the patient unless she's incapacitated. Mrs. Sterling is conscious and capable of making her own choices. Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude toward the doctor for reinforcing her autonomy at a moment when Marcus was trying to reassert control. Even in labor, even in crisis, she was still a person with rights and choices. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Daniel's voice came over the intercom with practiced calm. We're experiencing a medical emergency and will be returning to Denver International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened as we begin our descent. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing procedures. Through the small window, Rebecca could see the lights of Denver growing larger as they descended. The contractions were coming closer together now, and Dr. Martinez was looking increasingly concerned about both Rebecca's blood pressure and the baby's heart rate. Rebecca, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Once we get to the hospital, I'll handle everything. I'll make sure you get the best care, the private room, whatever you need. But we're going to keep this family matter private. Understood? Rebecca looked at him through a haze of pain and medication, seeing with sudden clarity the man she had married. Even now, with their baby's life potentially at risk, Marcus was thinking about managing the situation, controlling the narrative, maintaining his image. No, she said quietly. What? I said no, Rebecca repeated, her voice growing stronger despite the pain. You don't get to handle anything. You don't get to make my medical decisions. You don't get to control who I see or talk to. Marcus's mask slipped entirely. Rebecca, you're in labor and clearly not thinking straight. Don't say something you'll regret later. The only thing I regret, Rebecca said, looking directly at him, is not saying it sooner. The aircraft touched down at Denver International with the gentlest landing Rebecca had ever experienced, Daniel's skill evident even in emergency conditions. Through the windows, she could see ambulances and fire trucks lined up on the taxiway, their lights painting the darkness in urgent colors. As the plane rolled toward the gate, Rebecca felt another contraction beginning and reached out instinctively for support. But it wasn't Marcus's hand she grasped. It was her father's. For the first time in 3 years, Rebecca wasn't facing a crisis alone, and for the first time in 18 years, Daniel wasn't walking away when his daughter needed him most. Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital's high-risk obstetrics unit was a symphony of controlled urgency. Rebecca lay in a private room, surrounded by monitors tracking both her vital signs and her daughter's, while Dr. Amanda Foster worked with quiet efficiency to stabilize her condition. The good news, Amanda said, checking the latest test results, is that we've managed to stop the contractions for now. The magnesium sulfate is doing its job, and your blood pressure is coming down. Rebecca nodded, still groggy from the medication, but immensely relieved. Through the room's large window, she could see Daniel in the hallway, speaking quietly with what appeared to be a team of attorneys while keeping one eye on her room. The challenging news, Amanda continued, is that you're showing signs of severe stress-induced preeclampsia. Your body is essentially rejecting the pregnancy because it perceives the environment as too dangerous for both you and the baby. Dangerous how? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Amanda sat down beside the bed, her expression serious but kind. Rebecca, I've been an obstetrician for 15 years, and I've seen this pattern before. When a pregnant woman's stress hormones remain consistently elevated due to ongoing emotional or physical threat, it can trigger premature labor and other complications. Rebecca closed her eyes, understanding. Her body had been trying to protect her daughter the only way it knew how, by ending a pregnancy that was taking place in an unsafe environment. Where's Marcus? Rebecca asked, realizing she hadn't seen her husband since the ambulance ride to the hospital. Your father had him removed from the premises, Amanda said with a slight smile. Apparently, Mr. Blackwood became belligerent with the nursing staff when they wouldn't let him override your medical directives. Hospital security escorted him out after he threatened to sue everyone involved. Rebecca felt a wave of relief so profound it was almost physical. For the first time in months, she was in a space where Marcus couldn't intimidate the staff, couldn't override her choices, couldn't use his wealth and influence to control her care. Your father is quite something, Amanda continued. I haven't seen someone move mountains that quickly since, well, ever. He had your medical records transferred from your previous doctor, arranged for the best perinatologist in the state to consult on your case, and somehow managed to get you declared financially independent for insurance purposes, all in the space of 2 hours. Financially independent. Rebecca, Amanda said gently, your father has legally established you as a patient under his insurance coverage rather than your husband's. It means Marcus can't use your medical care as leverage, can't threaten to withdraw coverage, can't make decisions about your treatment. Rebecca stared at her friend, processing the implications. In the space of a few hours, Daniel had systematically dismantled the financial controls Marcus had used to keep her trapped. She was beginning to understand that her father's wealth wasn't just about money, it was about options, freedom, the ability to protect the people he loved. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Daniel entered, followed by a woman Rebecca didn't recognize at first. Then the visitor turned, and Rebecca's breath caught. Mom. Charlotte Hayes looked older than Rebecca remembered, her auburn hair now silver, her face lined with years of worry and regret. But her eyes were the same warm green Rebecca had inherited, and they were filled with tears. Hello, sweetheart, Charlotte said quietly. Rebecca looked between her parents, seeing them together for the first time since their bitter divorce 18 years ago. Why are you here? I called her, Daniel said simply. When I realized you were in labor, I thought you should have your mother with you. Charlotte approached the bed slowly, as if afraid Rebecca might ask her to leave. Your father called me for the first time in 15 years, she said. He told me what happened at the airport, about your husband, about everything. I got on the first flight from Phoenix. You came, Rebecca said, her voice breaking slightly. Of course I came, Charlotte replied. You're my daughter. You're having a baby. Where else would I be? Rebecca looked at her parents, standing awkwardly on opposite sides of her hospital bed, and realized that despite everything that had gone wrong between them, they had both dropped everything to be here when she needed them. I need to understand, Rebecca said. I need to know why our family fell apart, why you two couldn't make it work, why I spent my whole childhood feeling like I was the reason everyone left. Daniel and Charlotte exchanged a look that held 18 years of unfinished conversations. You were never the reason, Charlotte said firmly. Never. The problems between your father and me had nothing to do with you. Then what? Rebecca asked. I remember the fighting, the accusations, the way you looked at Dad like you hated him by the end. Charlotte sat down in the chair beside Rebecca's bed, her hands trembling slightly. Your father wasn't the only one who made mistakes, she said quietly. I made some terrible choices, and I was too proud and too scared to admit them. Daniel moved to the window, giving Charlotte space to speak, but staying close enough to participate in the conversation. Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was preparing himself for whatever revelation was coming. I had an affair, Charlotte said finally. When you were 10 years old, I got involved with someone else. Your father was traveling constantly, building the airline, and I felt abandoned and ignored. I made choices I'm not proud of. Rebecca stared at her mother, trying to process this information. An affair. It didn't last long, Charlotte continued, but the damage was done. When your father found out, he was devastated. But instead of fighting for our marriage, instead of going to counseling or trying to work through it, we both retreated into blame and resentment. Daniel turned from the window. I threw myself even deeper into work, he said. I convinced myself that if I could just build something big enough, successful enough, it would prove I was worthy of being chosen. But all I accomplished was proving Charlotte's point about my priorities. So you divorced, Rebecca said. We divorced, Charlotte confirmed. And I was so angry, so hurt by his emotional absence even before the affair, that I made it as difficult as possible for him to maintain a relationship with you. I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment, but really I was punishing him. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the truth about her childhood. She hadn't been abandoned by a father who didn't love her. She had been the victim of two adults who couldn't find their way back to each other after betrayal and hurt. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly. "I'm sorry I wasn't present enough in our marriage to prevent the loneliness that led to the affair. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for our family when everything fell apart. And I'm sorry I let my own hurt and pride keep me away from you for so long." "I'm sorry too," Charlotte added. "I'm sorry I had the affair. Sorry I made it difficult for you to have a relationship with your father. Sorry I let my own pain cloud my judgment about what was best for you." Rebecca looked at her parents, seeing them clearly for the first time as flawed humans who had made terrible mistakes while trying to navigate impossible circumstances. She thought about her own marriage, about the choices she had made in trying to find the security and love she had missed in childhood. "I married Marcus because he represented everything I thought I wanted," Rebecca said slowly. "Financial security, someone who would never leave, someone who claimed he would always put me first. But he put himself first," Daniel observed quietly. "Always," Rebecca confirmed. "And he used my fear of abandonment to keep me trapped. Every time I questioned his behavior, he would remind me that I had nowhere else to go, no one else who would take care of me." Charlotte reached for Rebecca's hand. "Sweetheart, you always had somewhere to go. You always had people who would take care of you. We just did such a terrible job of showing you that." Amanda Foster, who had been quietly checking Rebecca's monitors during this family reunion, spoke up. "Your blood pressure is continuing to improve," she said. "Whatever's happening in this room, it's having a positive effect on both you and the baby." Rebecca smiled through her tears, realizing that for the first time in years, she was surrounded by people who were more concerned with her well-being than their own comfort. It was a feeling she had forgotten existed. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel and Charlotte looked at each other, and Rebecca saw something pass between them that might have been forgiveness, or at least the beginning of understanding. "Now," Daniel said, "we figure out how to be a family again. Imperfect, complicated, but real. And," Charlotte added, "we make sure you and your daughter have everything you need to be safe and happy." Rebecca placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's gentle movements as her stress levels continued to decrease. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, she felt genuinely excited about becoming a mother. She was going to raise her daughter surrounded by love instead of control, supported by family instead of isolated by manipulation, empowered to make choices instead of having decisions made for her. It wasn't the family she had planned on, but it was the family she needed. And for the first time in her adult life, that felt like enough. The hospital room had settled into quiet comfort when Charlotte stood and walked to the window, her silhouette outlined against the Denver skyline. Rebecca could see the tension in her mother's shoulders, the way she was gathering courage for another difficult conversation. "There's something else," Charlotte said without turning around. "Something I should have told you both years ago, but I was too ashamed and too afraid." Daniel straightened in his chair, and Rebecca felt her heart rate increase enough to trigger a beep from the monitoring equipment. "Mom, you don't have to," Rebecca began. "Yes, I do," Charlotte interrupted, finally turning to face them. "If we're going to rebuild this family on truth instead of secrets, then I need to tell you about Robert." Rebecca's younger brother, who was 26 and training to be a commercial pilot like Daniel, had always been the golden child in their fractured family. While Rebecca had struggled with feeling abandoned and unloved, Robert had seemed to navigate their parents' divorce with remarkable resilience. "What about Robert?" Daniel asked quietly. Charlotte's hands trembled as she spoke. "The affair I had, it resulted in a pregnancy. Robert isn't your biological son, Daniel." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Rebecca watched her father's face carefully, looking for signs of anger or betrayal, but saw only sadness and something that might have been relief. "I know," Daniel said simply. Both women stared at him in shock. "You know," Charlotte whispered. "I've known since Robert was 3 years old," Daniel confirmed. "He needed a blood transfusion after that car accident. Remember, I found out then that he couldn't be my biological child?" Rebecca felt the world shift around her again. Then why? Why did you never say anything? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Because Robert was my son in every way that mattered. I had raised him from birth, loved him, been the only father he had ever known. Learning about his biological parentage didn't change that. But you divorced Mom anyway, Rebecca pointed out. I divorced your mother because our marriage was broken beyond repair, Daniel said. Not because of Robert's parentage, but because we had lost the ability to trust and communicate with each other. The affair was a symptom, not the cause. Charlotte sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. You knew, and you never used it against me. Even during the custody battles, even when I was making it difficult for you to see the children, you never threatened to reveal the truth about Robert. I considered it, Daniel admitted. In my angriest moments, I thought about exposing the secret, about demanding paternity tests, about using it as leverage. But Robert didn't deserve to be hurt by adult mistakes, and neither did Rebecca. Rebecca looked at her father with new understanding. Even in the midst of his own pain and betrayal, he had protected both of his children from knowledge that could have shattered their sense of identity and belonging. Does Robert know? Rebecca asked. No, Charlotte said. His biological father moved to Europe before Robert was born and has never been part of his life. As far as Robert knows, Daniel is his father. Because I am his father, Daniel said firmly. Biology doesn't determine family. Love and commitment do. Rebecca thought about her own situation, about the daughter growing inside her, who would be born into a complicated family situation. Marcus would always be her biological father, but that didn't mean he would be the primary male influence in her life. This changes everything, Rebecca said slowly. How so? Daniel asked. Marcus has been threatening to take the baby away from me if I leave him, Rebecca explained. He says he has more resources for a custody battle, that courts favor fathers with money and stability. But if I have family support, if I have resources of my own. You do, Daniel said immediately. Both financial and emotional. Marcus can't use poverty or isolation as weapons against you. Charlotte reached for Rebecca's hand again. Sweetheart, I know I made terrible mistakes when you were growing up. I know I let my own pain cloud my judgment about what was best for you. But I won't make those mistakes again. If you need me, I'm here. Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand, feeling forgiveness and understanding replacing years of resentment. I need both of you, she admitted. I need to know that my daughter will grow up surrounded by people who love her unconditionally, who will protect her, who will show her what healthy relationships look like. She will, Daniel promised, but first we need to make sure you're both safe from Marcus. I've had my legal team preparing divorce papers and custody documentation since you signed those first documents at the hospital. Rebecca's eyes widened. You've been planning this for hours. I've been planning this for months, Daniel corrected. Ever since my investigator documented the escalating pattern of abuse, I was waiting for the right moment, waiting for you to be ready, but tonight's events accelerated the timeline. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Foster entered with a tablet full of test results and a cautiously optimistic expression. Rebecca, your blood pressure has stabilized completely, and the baby's heart rate is strong and steady. Amanda reported, whatever changes you've made in the last few hours are having a remarkably positive effect on your health. It's called hope, Rebecca said, looking around the room at her parents. For the first time in years, I have hope, Amanda smiled. Hope is powerful medicine. But I want to keep you here for observation for at least another 24 hours. Preeclampsia can return quickly, and we want to make sure both you and the baby remain stable. That's fine, Rebecca said. I'm not ready to leave this room anyway. It feels like the first safe space I've had in years. As Amanda left to check on other patients, Charlotte stood and stretched. I should call Robert, she said. He deserves to know what's happening with his sister. And his niece, Daniel added. He's going to be an uncle. Saram. Rebecca watched her parents coordinate plans with the easy familiarity of people who had once been partners, and she realized that despite everything that had gone wrong between them, they still cared about each other. Maybe not romantically, but as the parents of children they both loved, as people who had shared significant portions of their lives. Are you two going to be okay? Rebecca asked. Working together, I mean, Daniel and Charlotte looked at each other, and Rebecca saw a silent conversation pass between them. We're different people than we were 18 years ago, Charlotte said finally. We've both made mistakes. We've both learned from them, and we both want what's best for our children and grandchildren. That's enough to build on, Daniel agreed. Rebecca settled back against her pillows, feeling safer and more hopeful than she had in years. Her marriage was ending. Her life was changing dramatically, and she was about to become a single mother with a newborn daughter. But she wasn't facing any of it alone. For the first time since she was 12 years old, Rebecca had her family back. Complicated, imperfect, but real and loving and committed to protecting each other. It was more than enough. It was everything. Rebecca woke the next morning to the sound of raised voices in the hospital corridor. Through her partially open door, she could see Marcus gesturing emphatically at a woman in an expensive business suit while Dr. Foster and a security guard watched from nearby. That's Eleanor Blackwood, Rebecca said quietly to Daniel, who had spent the night in the reclining chair beside her bed. Marcus's mother and his attorney? Daniel's expression hardened as he studied the older woman through the doorway. Eleanor Blackwood was known in business circles as someone who considered ethics a luxury her family couldn't afford. She had built the Blackwood fortune on leveraged buyouts and strategic bankruptcies that left thousands unemployed while enriching a select few. Mrs. Sterling, Eleanor called out, having spotted Rebecca through the open door. I need to speak with you immediately about this ridiculous situation. Before Rebecca could respond, Daniel stood and walked to the doorway, effectively blocking Eleanor's access to the room. Mrs. Blackwood, visiting hours begin at 9 a.m., and all visitors must be approved by the patient. I'm not a visitor, Eleanor snapped. I'm Rebecca's mother-in-law, and I'm here to discuss a serious family matter that affects my son's interests. Your son's interests, Daniel repeated calmly, do not override my daughter's medical needs or her right to refuse visitors. Eleanor studied Daniel with the calculating gaze of someone used to identifying and exploiting weaknesses. You're the pilot from yesterday, the one who caused this entire mess by interfering in a private family matter. I'm Rebecca's father, Daniel corrected, and the owner of the airline your son uses for business travel. I believe his company has a corporate account with us worth approximately $2 million annually. The threat was subtle but clear. Eleanor's expression shifted slightly as she processed the implications of alienating someone who controlled Marcus's preferred method of transportation. Mr. Hayes, Eleanor said, switching to a more diplomatic tone, surely we can resolve this situation like reasonable adults? Marcus made a mistake yesterday, but he's willing to make amends. He's prepared to be very generous in addressing Rebecca's concerns. Rebecca struggled to sit up straighter, her monitors beeping softly as her heart rate increased. I can hear you talking about me like I'm not here, she called out, and I can speak for myself. Eleanor pushed past Daniel into the room, ignoring his protests. Rebecca, darling, you look terrible. This is exactly why you need to come home where you can receive proper care. Marcus has arranged for a private medical team to monitor your pregnancy. Mrs. Blackwood, Dr. Foster said firmly, following Eleanor into the room. Mrs. Sterling is under my care, and her current treatment plan is working well. Moving her would be inadvisable. Eleanor dismissed the doctor with a wave. Rebecca, be practical. You're about to have a baby. You need stability, security, a proper home. Marcus is prepared to put yesterday's unfortunate incident behind him if you're willing to be reasonable. Reasonable? Rebecca felt anger building in her chest, stronger than the fear that usually accompanied interactions with Marcus's family. He physically assaulted me in public, in front of hundreds of witnesses. He barely touched you, Eleanor replied dismissively. And you provoked him with this dramatic nonsense about leaving. Men get frustrated when their wives create scenes. Rebecca, surely you understand that. Daniel stepped fully into the room, his presence shifting the entire dynamic. Mrs. Blackwood, you have 30 seconds to explain why you think domestic violence is acceptable before I have security remove you from this hospital. Eleanor's mask of civility finally slipped completely. Because she belongs to my son, she said coldly. They're married. She signed a prenuptial agreement. She has no rights to community property. No access to joint accounts, no claim to anything Marcus built before their marriage. If she leaves him, she leaves with nothing. Except her life, Daniel said quietly, and her daughter's life, and her self-respect. Self-respect doesn't pay medical bills, Eleanor shot back. It doesn't provide for children or maintain health insurance or secure proper education. Rebecca made a choice when she married Marcus, and choices have consequences. Rebecca watched the exchange, seeing clearly for the first time how Marcus had learned his approach to relationships. Eleanor Blackwood viewed marriage as a business transaction, with Rebecca as an asset that had been purchased and therefore owned. "You're right," Rebecca said quietly, causing everyone in the room to look at her. "Choices do have consequences." Eleanor smiled triumphantly. "I'm glad you're being sensible. Dear, I chose to marry your son because I was afraid of being alone and abandoned," Rebecca continued. "The consequence was 3 years of escalating abuse and control. Now I'm choosing differently." "Rebecca," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a warning tone, "don't make decisions you'll regret. Without Marcus, you're a single mother with no resources, no support, no future. He's willing to forgive your dramatic behavior, but his patience isn't unlimited. She has resources," Daniel said calmly. "She has support, and she has a future that doesn't depend on tolerating abuse." Eleanor turned on him with venom. "Stay out of this. You abandoned your family once already. What makes you think you can waltz back in and play hero now?" The words were designed to wound, to make Daniel question his right to protect his daughter. But Rebecca saw something in her father's expression that told her Eleanor had miscalculated badly. "Mrs. Blackwood," Daniel said with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded respect in boardrooms and cockpits around the world. "I made mistakes 18 years ago. I'm not making them again." He pulled out his phone and showed Eleanor the screen. "This is a restraining order that was filed this morning, prohibiting your son from coming within 500 feet of Rebecca or contacting her in any way. This is documentation of assets I've transferred to her name, ensuring she has independent financial resources. And this is a custody filing that preemptively addresses any attempt Marcus might make to use their child as leverage." Eleanor stared at the phone, her face paling as she processed the information. "You can't do this. Marcus has rights as a husband and father. Marcus has the right to remain silent," came a new voice from the doorway. Federal Agent Patricia Rivera stepped into the room with 2 colleagues, their badges clearly visible. "Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest for securities fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud." Rebecca looked through the doorway to see Marcus in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Eleanor rushed toward her son, her composure finally cracking completely. "This is harassment," she screamed. "My son is a respected businessman. You have no grounds for this." Agent Rivera consulted her notes. "We have 3 years of documented financial irregularities, insider trading violations, and evidence of using corporate accounts for personal expenses that constitute tax fraud. The investigation began after several whistleblowers came forward with evidence." Rebecca looked at Daniel, who was carefully not meeting her eyes. "Dad, did you—" "I provided information that was requested by federal investigators," Daniel said quietly. "Information that my security team had gathered during their assessment of Marcus's background." Eleanor spun around to face them. "You orchestrated this. You set my son up." "Your son set himself up," Daniel replied calmly. "I simply made sure the appropriate authorities had access to information that was already part of the public record, if they knew where to look." Rebecca watched her husband being led away in handcuffs and felt something she hadn't expected: relief. For months, she had been afraid of what Marcus might do if she tried to leave him. Now that choice had been taken out of both their hands. "Rebecca," Eleanor said desperately, "you can't let them do this to him. He's the father of your child. Think about what this means for your family's reputation." Rebecca looked at Marcus's mother and saw a woman who had spent her entire life enabling and protecting a man who used power to hurt others. She thought about her daughter, about the kind of family she wanted to raise her in, about the example she wanted to set. "Mrs. Blackwood," Rebecca said clearly, "I am thinking about my family, and you're not part of it." Eleanor's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this. All of you. The Blackwood family doesn't forget, and we don't forgive." "Neither," said Daniel quietly. "Do the Hayes family." As Eleanor stormed out of the room, Following her son and the federal agents, Rebecca felt the last piece of her old life crumble away. The marriage that had promised security but delivered imprisonment was over. The financial threats that had kept her trapped were neutralized. The man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 3 years was facing federal charges that would likely keep him occupied for years to come. She was free, scared, uncertain about the future, but genuinely free for the first time in her adult life. Rebecca placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's gentle movements, and realized that her child would never know what it felt like to live in fear of someone who was supposed to love and protect her. It was the greatest gift she could imagine giving. 2 days later, Rebecca was finally cleared for discharge from the hospital. Her blood pressure had stabilized, the preeclampsia symptoms had resolved, and Dr. Foster was cautiously optimistic about the remainder of her pregnancy. "Remember," Amanda said as she reviewed the discharge instructions, "stress is your enemy right now. Your body and your baby need calm, consistent care for the next 6 weeks until delivery." Rebecca nodded, gathering her few belongings while Daniel and Charlotte handled the paperwork and logistics. It felt surreal to be leaving the hospital as a different person than she had been when she arrived divorced, financially independent, and surrounded by family support she had forgotten existed. "Where am I going?" Rebecca asked, realizing she had been so focused on getting away from Marcus that she hadn't considered where she would actually live. "Home," Daniel said simply, helping her into a wheelchair despite her protests that she could walk. "I don't have a home anymore," Rebecca pointed out. "The house was in Marcus's name, and I'm sure I'm not welcome there now." Charlotte appeared beside them with a folder full of documents. "Actually, you do have a home. Your father purchased a house for you yesterday." Rebecca stared at them both. "You bought me a house in one day." "I bought you options," Daniel corrected as they made their way through the hospital corridors. "There are 3 properties available, all in secure neighborhoods, all fully furnished and ready for immediate occupancy. You can choose the one that feels right." Outside the hospital, a black SUV waited with a driver who looked more like security than transportation. Rebecca was beginning to understand that her father's wealth came with protections she had never considered necessary. "Is all this really needed?" she asked as they drove through Denver's afternoon traffic. "Marcus posted bail this morning," Daniel said quietly, "and Eleanor Blackwood has been making statements to the press about vindictive prosecution and family betrayal. I'd rather err on the side of caution." Rebecca felt a chill despite the warm September afternoon. She had hoped that Marcus's arrest would end his ability to threaten her. But clearly the Blackwood family's influence extended beyond what federal charges could immediately neutralize. The first house Daniel showed her was a stunning contemporary home in Cherry Hills Village, complete with a nursery that had been professionally designed and a security system that would have impressed the Secret Service. But it felt like a fortress, beautiful but isolated. The second property was a charming Victorian near downtown, within walking distance of shops and restaurants. But Rebecca felt exposed there, visible to anyone who might be watching. The third house made her cry. It was a craftsman-style home in Park Hill, with a wide front porch and mature trees that provided natural privacy. The nursery was painted a soft yellow with white furniture and a mobile of airplanes that played gentle music when it turned. The master bedroom had a reading nook by the window where Rebecca could imagine feeding her daughter while watching the neighborhood children play in the park across the street. "This one," she said immediately. "This feels like home." Daniel smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression she had seen from him since their reunion. "I hoped you'd choose this one. It reminds me of the house where you grew up." Rebecca looked around the living room, with its built-in bookshelves and fireplace, and realized he was right. This house felt like safety and warmth rather than wealth and display. "How long can I stay here?" she asked, suddenly practical about the generosity being shown to her. "It's Charlotte said simply. "The deed is in your name." "I can't accept what, Rebecca," Daniel interrupted gently. "I missed 18 years of being your father. I missed graduations and birthdays and every milestone that mattered. I can't buy back those years, but I can make sure you and my granddaughter have the security I should have provided all along." Rebecca sank into one of the comfortable chairs, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. 3 days ago, she had been trapped in an abusive marriage with no resources and no options. Now she owned a house, had access to financial accounts she had never imagined, and was surrounded by family support. "What happens next?" she asked. "Now you rest," Charlotte said firmly. "You take care of yourself and the baby. You let us take care of everything else." "I can't just sit around for the next 6 weeks," Rebecca protested. "I need to do something productive." Daniel and Charlotte exchanged a look that reminded Rebecca they had once been partners in raising children. "Actually," Daniel said slowly, "there might be something you could help with, if you're interested." "What kind of something?" "Hayes Aviation is expanding our corporate social responsibility programs," Daniel continued. "We're looking to establish a foundation focused on supporting women and families in crisis situations. Given your background in marketing and your recent experiences, you might be uniquely qualified to help develop the program." Rebecca looked at her father with interest. "What kind of support? Emergency housing, legal assistance, financial counseling, job training, comprehensive support for women trying to leave dangerous situations," Daniel explained. "I've been wanting to do something like this for years, but I never had someone with the right combination of professional skills and personal understanding to lead it." Charlotte nodded approvingly. "It would give you purpose while you're recovering, and it would help other women who are facing what you just went through." Rebecca felt a spark of excitement, the first genuine enthusiasm she had experienced in months. "I could design the marketing strategy, develop partnerships with existing organizations, create awareness campaigns, all from home, on your own schedule, with full support staff," Daniel added quickly. "Nothing that would create stress or interfere with your recovery." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood street. She could imagine herself here, working on something meaningful, raising her daughter in a place that felt safe and welcoming. "There's something else," Charlotte said hesitantly. "Robert is flying in tomorrow. He wants to see you, to meet his niece when she arrives, to be part of whatever family we're building here." Rebecca smiled, thinking of her younger brother who had always been the family peacemaker. "He doesn't know, does he, about Marcus, about any of this? He knows you're getting divorced and that there were safety concerns," Daniel said, "but he doesn't know the details. That's your story to tell. If and when you're ready." A soft chime indicated someone at the front door. Daniel checked his phone and frowned slightly. "That's my security team. They weren't expecting any visitors." Rebecca felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "Is it Marcus?" "No," Daniel said, checking the security system on his phone. "He's still in federal custody. But there's a woman at the door who says she's a friend of yours. Jennifer Cruz." Rebecca's face lit up with the first genuine smile she had felt in days. "She's the flight attendant from your plane. She witnessed everything at the airport." Daniel nodded to his security team through the intercom, and moments later Jennifer appeared at the door with a small bouquet of flowers and a concerned expression. "I hope it's okay that I came by," Jennifer said. "I've been worried about you since the emergency landing. The crew has been asking about you." Rebecca hugged her gratefully. "I'm so glad you're here. Come in, please." As Jennifer settled into the living room, Rebecca realized she was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years: friendship without obligation, concern without control, support without strings attached. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer asked. "Really and scared," Rebecca admitted. "Hopeful, grateful, confused, sometimes all at the same time." Jennifer nodded knowingly. "I've seen this before, unfortunately. Women trapped by men who use money and intimidation to maintain control. It takes tremendous courage to break free." "I'm not sure I broke free," Rebecca said. "I think I was rescued." "No," Daniel said quietly from where he was standing by the fireplace. "You chose to accept help when it was offered. That's not the same as being rescued. That's choosing to save yourself." Rebecca considered this, thinking about the moment at the airport when she had refused to minimize Marcus's behavior, when she had chosen truth over safety. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she had been braver than she realized. "What happens with the legal stuff?" Jennifer asked. "With your husband. Marcus is facing federal charges that will likely keep him in prison for several years." Charlotte explained. "The divorce will be finalized while he's incarcerated, and custody arrangements have been structured to protect both Rebecca and the baby. He can't just disappear from his daughter's life entirely," Rebecca said, feeling the complexity of the situation. "Whatever else he is, He's still her biological father. Supervised visitation only, Daniel said firmly, and only if he completes anger management and parenting classes, and only if you feel comfortable with it. His rights as a father don't supersede your right to safety or your daughter's right to grow up without fear. Jennifer looked around the beautiful house, taking in the obvious security measures and expensive furnishings. This is quite a change from being trapped with no resources. I'm still processing it, Rebecca admitted. 3 days ago, I thought I had no family and no options. Now I'm surrounded by people who want to help, living in a house I own, planning a career that could help other women in similar situations. Life can change fast when you make the right choices, Jennifer observed. But the hard part is maintaining those changes when the crisis passes and daily life sets in. Rebecca placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's gentle movements. I think about her constantly, she said, about what kind of mother I want to be, what kind of world I want to raise her in, what kind of example I want to set. Then you'll do fine, Jennifer said confidently. Children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who are trying to do better, who are choosing love over fear, who are building something good instead of just avoiding something bad. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca found herself relaxing into the rhythm of normal conversation with people who cared about her well-being without agenda. Charlotte made tea in the kitchen that had been stocked with Rebecca's favorite foods. Daniel worked quietly on his laptop, handling business calls with the calm efficiency that had built his empire. Jennifer shared stories about other passengers she had helped over the years, women who had found their courage at 30,000 feet and used it to change their lives. By evening, Rebecca realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the nervous calm that came from successfully avoiding Marcus's displeasure, but genuine tranquility rooted in safety and support. I should go, Jennifer said as the sun set outside the living room windows. But I want you to know that the entire crew from that flight has been talking about you. You inspired a lot of people with your courage that night. Rebecca walked Jennifer to the door, surprised by how normal it felt to be hosting a friend in her own home. Thank you for coming, for everything. Take care of yourself, Jennifer said, hugging her goodbye. And remember, you're not alone anymore. As Jennifer's car pulled away, Rebecca stood on her front porch, breathing in the cool evening air. Across the street, families were gathering for dinner, children playing in yards, neighbors walking dogs and chatting over fences. It was the kind of normal, peaceful life she had dreamed of during the darkest moments of her marriage. Now it was her reality, and her daughter would grow up thinking this was simply how families were supposed to function. Ready to come inside? Daniel asked from the doorway. Rebecca nodded, taking one last look at the neighborhood that was now home. Ready. As she walked into the house, Rebecca felt her daughter kick strongly, as if she too was settling into this new life with approval. They were both exactly where they belonged. 6 weeks later, Rebecca Sterling Hayes gave birth to Hope Charlotte Hayes at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, surrounded by 3 generations of family who had found their way back to each other. The delivery was smooth and uncomplicated, a stark contrast to the emergency that had brought them all together. Dr. Amanda Foster delivered a healthy 6-pound daughter who emerged into the world with a strong cry and an obvious family resemblance. She has your eyes, Charlotte whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her granddaughter for the first time. And Daniel's stubborn chin. Rebecca lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but euphoric, watching her parents take turns holding Hope with the wonder of people who had thought they might never experience this joy. Daniel was particularly entranced, speaking softly to the baby about airplanes and adventures while she gripped his finger with surprising strength. She's going to be a pilot, he declared confidently. Look at that grip. She's going to be whatever she wants to be, Rebecca corrected gently. That's the whole point. Robert had arrived from his flight training program in Phoenix, and Rebecca marveled at how much her little brother had grown in the years since their parents' divorce. At 26, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his calling, but his eyes still held the gentle humor she remembered from childhood. I can't believe I'm an uncle, he said, cradling Hope with surprising confidence. I've been practicing with my instructors, baby, learning how to hold them properly. You're a natural, Rebecca observed, watching her brother interact with her daughter. Hope seemed completely content in his arms, her tiny face peaceful and trusting. Dr. Foster checked Rebecca's vitals and pronounced everything normal. Your blood pressure is perfect. Your recovery is progressing beautifully, and this little one is absolutely healthy. I'd say this is what happens when a pregnancy occurs in a supportive, low-stress environment. Rebecca nodded, thinking about the contrast between her first trimester, when she had been walking on eggshells around Marcus, and her third trimester, when she had been surrounded by family and focused on building a new life. Any word from the father? Amanda asked quietly, consulting her chart. Marcus is still in federal custody, Daniel replied. His trial isn't scheduled for another 6 months, and his attorney has advised him to avoid any contact that might be construed as intimidating a witness. Rebecca had mixed feelings about Marcus's absence from their daughter's birth. Part of her felt guilty that Hope's biological father wasn't there to meet her, but a larger part was relieved that this perfect moment wasn't complicated by his presence and the chaos that always surrounded him. He can meet her when he's ready to be a positive presence in her life, Rebecca said firmly. If that ever happens, Eleanor Blackwood had made several attempts to establish grandparental rights, but Daniel's legal team had successfully argued that the family's pattern of intimidation and control posed a threat to the child's well-being. Any future relationship would require court supervision and Eleanor's completion of family therapy. Some people don't deserve access to children, Charlotte said firmly, clearly thinking about the same issue. Love isn't automatic just because you share DNA. Rebecca looked around the hospital room at the family that had reformed itself around love and commitment rather than obligation and genetics. Daniel wasn't Robert's biological father, but he was the only father Robert had ever known. Charlotte had made terrible mistakes in their marriage, but she had worked to earn forgiveness and rebuild trust. Rebecca herself was a single mother who would be raising her daughter with the support of people who chose to be family. Speaking of family, Daniel said, settling into the chair beside Rebecca's bed. I have something for you. He handed her an envelope with Hayes Aviation letterhead, and Rebecca opened it to find official documentation, making her the Director of Community Outreach and Women's Services for the Hayes Foundation. It's a real job, Daniel explained, with a real salary and real responsibilities. The foundation is launching next month, and we need someone to lead the development of programs for women and families in crisis. Rebecca studied the paperwork, seeing her name and qualifications listed officially, seeing the substantial salary that would ensure her complete financial independence. Dad, this is too much. It's not enough, he replied, but it's a start. You'll work from home initially, with a full support staff and flexible hours that accommodate Hope's schedule. As she gets older and you're ready for more responsibility, the role can grow with you. What about qualifications experience? I haven't worked in almost 3 years. Charlotte laughed softly. Sweetheart, you have more relevant experience than anyone we could hire. You know exactly what women in abusive relationships need because you've been there. You understand the barriers and fears because you've faced them. You have the education and professional background to design effective programs, and you have the family support to do the job without compromising your own well-being. Rebecca looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in Robert's arms, and imagined the foundation helping other women make the same escape she had made. She thought about the airport incident that had started everything, about how differently her life might have turned out if she hadn't had family support and resources. How many women do you think we could help in the first year? She asked. Daniel smiled, recognizing the spark of enthusiasm in her voice. As many as you can design programs for. The foundation will have an initial budget of $50 million, with plans to expand based on demonstrated need and effectiveness. Rebecca stared at him. $50 million. It's an investment in changing lives, Daniel said simply. Starting with yours and Hope's, expanding to help other women and children who need support and options. Dr. Foster, who had been quietly checking on other patients, returned with discharge papers. Rebecca, you and Hope are both ready to go home whenever you're comfortable leaving. Home, Rebecca repeated, still adjusting to the concept of having a place that truly belonged to her. That sounds perfect. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been trapped in an abusive marriage with no apparent options for escape. Now she was a single mother with a newborn daughter, surrounded by family support, financially independent, and embarking on a career that could help other women find their own paths to freedom. The transformation seemed impossible. But it had happened one choice at a time, choosing to stop minimizing Marcus's behavior, choosing to accept help when it was offered, choosing to rebuild relationships with family members she had thought were lost forever, choosing to believe that she deserved better than she had been accepting. "Ready to take Hope home?" Daniel asked, helping Rebecca into the wheelchair that hospital policy required. "More than ready," Rebecca replied, settling Hope in her arms for the ride to the car. As they made their way through the hospital corridors, Rebecca noticed other families in various stages of crisis and celebration. A young mother in labor being wheeled toward delivery, an elderly man visiting his wife in intensive care, a teenager with a broken leg surrounded by concerned relatives. Life was complicated and difficult and sometimes dangerous, but it was also full of people who chose to show up for each other when it mattered most. Rebecca had learned that family wasn't about perfection or proximity. It was about people who chose to love and support each other through good decisions and terrible mistakes, through crises and celebrations, through the long work of building something better than what they had inherited. As they settled into Daniel's car for the drive home, Hope sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Rebecca realized she was no longer afraid of the future. She had resources and support and people who would help her navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger and braver than she had ever imagined. Strong enough to leave a marriage that was slowly destroying her. Brave enough to accept help from family members she had thought were lost forever. Wise enough to choose love over fear, again and again, until she got it right. Hope Charlotte Hayes would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and protected by people who had learned the hard way that family was something you built with intention and maintained with commitment. She would grow up understanding that strength wasn't about controlling others, but about having the courage to make difficult choices in service of what was right. And she would grow up knowing that no matter what challenges she faced in life, she would never have to face them alone. As they pulled into the driveway of the house Rebecca now called home, she realized that this was what happy endings actually looked like. Not perfect people in perfect circumstances, but imperfect people who had learned to choose love over pride, forgiveness over resentment, hope over fear. Rebecca Sterling Hayes was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family she had helped to rebuild, and holding the daughter who represented their shared future. She had finally learned how to fly.